I was sitting in the backyard, under the only large tree I had left, counting the last $42 in my wallet. I remember the number clearly because I counted it twice, slowly, the way you do when money stops being something you spend and starts being something you measure your life by. 2 20s, a single dollar, and 2 coins that felt heavier than they were worth. It was late afternoon, that quiet hour when the light turns pale and the air cools just enough to remind you that the day is almost done. The house behind me was silent, the kind of silence that settles in when no one else is expected to come home. In the 1980s, in a town like mine, silence was normal. It didn't mean peace, it just meant nobody was watching. The tree at my back was older than the house, older than most of the neighbors who had already moved away or been buried. Its trunk was wide, rough, scarred from storms and careless cuts made decades ago. Parts of it were hollowed deep inside, something I discovered years earlier when lightning split a section of bark. I never fixed it. I didn't have the money and I didn't see the need. The tree stood anyway, it always had. I used to sit there every day, leaning my back against it, feeling something solid behind me when everything else felt thin and temporary. That afternoon I remember thinking how quiet the yard felt, how still the air was, as if the world had paused without asking me first. I lived on a small monthly pension, nothing impressive. Enough for rent, enough for food if I was careful, not enough to matter to anyone. I didn't keep money in the bank anymore. Fees ate it alive. I kept cash hidden in the house. Not much, never more than a few hundred at a time. Still, in towns like this, rumors grow faster than facts. People talk, people assume. Somewhere along the line, someone decided I had more than I did. Maybe they thought old men always hide something. Maybe they thought time itself turns into money if you live long enough. I heard the engines before I saw the cars. 2 of them, not speeding, not cautious either. They rolled into my yard like they already belonged there, gravel crunching under the tires, dust lifting and hanging in the air. The sound didn't fit. No one ever came into my yard without stopping at the fence first. My heart reacted before my mind did. I stood up slowly, turning just enough to see the doors opening. 4 men stepping out like this was planned, like they'd rehearsed it somewhere else. They weren't loud. That's what scared me. No shouting, no laughter, just calm voices, short sentences, eyes already measuring me. One of them glanced at the house. Another looked at the tree behind me. I opened my mouth to speak, to ask what they wanted, but one of them was already moving closer. I tried to step back. My foot caught on the uneven ground and I stumbled, more from age than surprise. I swung once, clumsy and desperate, my fist barely connecting with anything solid. It was enough to make me feel human for half a second. Then it was over. Hands grabbed my arms, strong and efficient. I struggled, not because I thought I could win, but because giving up felt worse. Rope burned into my wrists as they pulled it tight, faster than I could understand how they already had it ready. Someone forced cloth into my mouth, tied it so hard my jaw ached instantly. My breath came sharp through my nose, chest heaving, panic pressing in from every side. I heard one of them say something about money. Another mentioned the house. They spoke like this was business, like I was paperwork that needed to be handled. I looked around for my dog. Buddy was usually right there, close enough that I could feel his warmth without touching him. But he wasn't. He must have gone toward the house earlier, maybe heard something inside, maybe just following his own old routines. For a moment, that thought was the only thing keeping me from breaking. If Buddy wasn't there, at least he was safe. At least he hadn't seen this. They dragged me backward toward the tree. My shoulder scraped against the bark, rough and unforgiving. I recognized the feel of it immediately, the same surface I'd leaned against for years. They tied me upright, my back pressed flat against the trunk, rope cinched tight around my chest and arms. One of them checked the knots like he cared whether I'd be comfortable. Another stepped back, looked at me for a second too long, then turned away. I remember thinking how ordinary their faces were. These weren't monsters. They were men who had decided something about me that wasn't true. Then they left. No dramatic exit, No final words, just the sound of engines starting again, tires crunching over gravel, the cars pulling away until even that noise faded. The dust settled. The yard returned to exactly how it had been minutes earlier, except for me, tied to the tree like something forgotten. The chair lay on its side where it had fallen. The house stood quiet. The road beyond the fence carried on, indifferent. I stood there, breathing through my nose, muscles already starting to ache, eyes fixed on the familiar backyard that suddenly felt wrong. I didn't know what they planned. I didn't know how long I'd be there. I only knew one thing with absolute clarity as the light began to soften and the shadows stretched across the ground. Somewhere nearby, Buddy was still alive, and I needed him to find me. I don't know how much time passed after they left. Minutes feel like hours when your body is tied and your mind has nowhere to run. The sun kept moving, though. I could feel it sliding away from me, the warmth on my face fading into something colder, thinner. My legs started to tremble first, not from fear, but from being forced to hold a position they weren't meant to hold anymore. I tried to shift my weight, to ease the pressure in my shoulders, but the rope answered every movement with pain. That was when I understood they hadn't tied me to scare me. They had tied me to keep me exactly where they wanted. At some point, hands came back. I didn't hear the cars this time. I only felt shadows move in front of me. One of them pressed a hand against my chest, firm, not angry, just checking. Another tugged at the rope around my wrists, tightening it further until my fingers went numb. I tried to scream, but the cloth in my mouth swallowed every sound. My eyes burned, not from tears, but from refusing to close. I was afraid that if I stopped watching, something worse would happen without me knowing. They spoke quietly again. Short sentences, numbers. I caught fragments, days, money, searching. One of them laughed once, a dry sound, like he didn't find anything funny, but did it anyway. Then they started working on the tree. I felt the first vibration before I understood what it meant. The bark behind me shifted, cracked, opened further than it ever had before. Tools scraped against wood. Pieces fell away. The tree groaned softly, a deep sound, like something old being forced to give up a secret. I realized then that the hollow I had ignored for years wasn't just a weakness. To them, it was an opportunity. They cut deeper, wider. I could feel cool air rush against my back as the inside of the trunk was exposed. One of them pushed me forward, another pulled from behind. My knees buckled as they forced my body into the opening. The space inside the tree was narrow, uneven, the wood pressing against my ribs and spine. I couldn't stand. I couldn't lie down properly either. They folded me into it, bent and cramped, like I was being stored rather than hidden. The rope stayed on. They didn't bother removing it. My hands were still bound behind me, my mouth still gagged. Someone shoved my legs in further, ignoring the way my joints protested. Then the light disappeared. They covered the opening carefully. Bark pressed back into place, loose wood layered over it. From the inside, I watched the last strip of daylight shrink to nothing. The sound of the yard returned, distant and muffled, as if I were already underground. When they were finished, one of them knocked on the trunk twice, slow and deliberate, like he was sealing a door. Then they left again. This time, the silence was complete. Inside the tree, the air smelled damp and old, like soil that hadn't seen sunlight in years. My breath sounded too loud in my own ears, each inhale scraping against the cloth in my mouth, each exhale bouncing back at me from the walls of wood. I tried to move my fingers. Nothing. My arms felt like they belonged to someone else. Panic rose fast then, not as a thought, but as a physical thing, squeezing my chest, making it hard to breathe. I forced myself to slow down. I had learned long ago that panic wastes energy, and energy was something I didn't have much of anymore. I focused on counting. Breaths first, then heartbeats. I tried to remember the last time I'd been in complete darkness. I couldn't. Even nights have edges. Even closed eyes know where the walls are. This darkness had no shape. It pressed in from every side. Time stopped behaving normally. I didn't know if it was night or day. I couldn't tell how long I'd been there. My legs cramped painfully, then went numb. My shoulders burned where the rope dug into them. Thirst crept in quietly, starting as a dry feeling in my throat and growing into something sharper, more demanding. I swallowed reflexively, even though there was nothing to swallow. They thought I had money hidden somewhere. That was the part that made everything feel unreal. Whatever story they'd believed, whatever rumor had reached them, it wasn't true. There was no fortune, no secret stash, no envelope buried under the floorboards. If they were waiting for me to talk, they would be waiting for nothing. At some point, exhaustion pushed fear aside. My head leaned back against the inner wall of the tree. The wood felt cool against my skin. I wondered if this was how people disappeared without explanation, not with drama or headlines, but quietly, in places everyone thought they knew. I imagined the yard outside unchanged, the chair still fallen, the house still standing. From the road, everything would look normal. I don't know when the first night passed. I only know that my body grew weaker, my thoughts slower, drifting in and out of focus. I thought of Buddy then. Not with hope yet, but with memory. The sound of his breathing at night, the way he followed me without needing to be called. I didn't know if he had seen what happened. I didn't know if he was searching or sleeping or waiting by the door. All I knew was this: I was alive, sealed inside a tree in my own backyard, and the world above me was moving on as if I had never been there at all. The first day inside the tree passed in pieces, not in hours. I knew it had been a full day, only because my body changed in ways it never had before. Hunger came and went quickly, almost politely, as if it understood there was no point in staying. Thirst did not leave. It grew heavier with every breath, turning my mouth into something raw and useless beneath the cloth. My tongue felt swollen, my lips cracked against the gag, and every swallow burned like I was dragging sand down my throat. I tried to keep my breathing slow, shallow, afraid that using too much air would make it run out, even though I knew that wasn't how air worked. Fear doesn't care what you know. By what I guessed was the second day, my legs were no longer legs. They were distant, numb shapes pressed into awkward angles that sent sharp flashes of pain up my spine whenever I shifted. My shoulders throbbed constantly where the rope cut into them, the ache deep and dull, like something slowly being ground down. I began to lose track of where my body ended and the tree began. The damp wood pressed into my back, my sides, my head, and I imagined my shape slowly being absorbed by it, like I was becoming part of something that would stand there long after I was gone. The darkness started to play tricks on me. At first, it was just sounds, faint tapping, low creaks, distant thumps that might have been cars on the road or branches moving in the wind. Then came voices, soft and familiar, whispering just beyond reach. I heard my own name once, clear enough that my heart jumped painfully in my chest. I tried to respond, forgetting for a moment that my mouth was useless, that sound couldn't leave me. The effort drained what little strength I had left. I counted to stay sane. Breaths, heartbeats. I tried counting years instead, moving backward through my life. My age, then the age I'd been when my dog first came home with me, then earlier still. But numbers slipped away too. Time lost its edges. I didn't know if it was still night or if another day had begun. I only knew that I was growing weaker, and weakness has a way of making honest thoughts unavoidable. I wondered if this was how it would end, not in a hospital bed or a quiet room, but folded into the dark, hidden in plain sight. By what I believed was the third day, my thoughts began to drift without my permission. Images came and went without warning. Sunlight through the kitchen window, the sound of Buddy's nails on the floor, the weight of his head resting against my leg when I sat too long. Those memories hurt more than the rope ever had, because they carried warmth with them, and warmth felt like a lie now. I stopped trying to move. Every effort felt expensive, like it might cost me something I couldn't afford to lose. Then I heard it. At first, I thought it was another trick of my mind, a soft scraping sound, irregular, faint, coming from somewhere above and slightly to the side. I held my breath, listening. It came again, scratching, slow, determined. My heart began to pound, hard enough that it hurt. I wanted to call out, to shout, to do anything that would let whoever or whatever was out there know I was still alive. But all I could do was breathe and wait. The sound grew clearer. Sniffing short bursts of breath, quick and searching, my chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with something dangerously close to hope. I knew that sound. I had heard it every day for years. Buddy! I couldn't see him, couldn't reach him, but I knew him the way you know your own heartbeat. He was there, somewhere in the yard, close enough to smell me. The scratching moved along the bark, circling, stopping, starting again. I imagined him with his nose pressed to the tree, confused, restless, unwilling to accept that the world made sense anymore. I stayed as still as I could, afraid that any movement might scare him away. The rope cut deeper into my wrists as I tried to shift just enough to make a sound. My shoulder brushed the inside of the trunk, and a dull thud echoed faintly through the wood. The scratching stopped. For a long moment there was nothing. My heart sank, heavy and sudden. Then the sound returned, louder this time, more urgent. Bark shifted. Tiny pieces fell, brushing against my face. A thin line of light appeared, no wider than a finger, slicing through the darkness like something unreal. Fresh air rushed in, cool and sharp, and I gasped involuntarily, my lungs aching as they filled properly for the first time in days. The light widened slightly. I could hear Buddy whining now, a low, desperate sound that made my eyes burn. He scratched harder, pawing at the bark, refusing to stop even when it didn't come away easily. I wanted to tell him to keep going, to thank him, to promise him I was still here. All I could do was stay alive long enough for someone else to hear him, because Buddy couldn't pull me out. But Buddy could refuse to leave, and somewhere beyond the tree, that refusal was about to matter. I don't remember the moment they cut the tree open as clearly as I remember the sound of air rushing back into my lungs. There was shouting somewhere above me, voices layered over one another, sharp with shock and disbelief. Tools struck wood again, louder this time, not careful, not precise. The bark tore away in heavy pieces, light flooding in so suddenly it hurt my eyes. Hands reached in, rough but urgent, pulling at the rope, cutting it away without concern for knots or skin. When the gag was ripped from my mouth, I tried to speak, but nothing came out at first. My throat was too dry, my voice forgotten from disuse. I could only breathe, long, desperate breaths, as if I had just been pulled from deep water. They laid me on the ground, the grass cold and unreal against my skin. The sky above me looked too wide, too bright, like something I didn't recognize anymore. I heard someone say it had been 3 days. Another voice corrected him. Almost 3. The number settled into me slowly. 3 days inside a tree in my own backyard. 3 days while the world moved forward without noticing. I felt hands pat my chest, my arms, my legs, checking if I was still whole. I didn't feel whole. I felt emptied out, like something essential had been drained and not yet replaced. Buddy was there. I felt him before I saw him, his weight against my side, his head pushing under my arm like he always did when he was scared or relieved or both at the same time. His fur was dirty, his paws scraped raw, his breathing fast and uneven. He whined softly, licking my face, my hands, anywhere he could reach, as if making sure I was real. I turned my head toward him and finally found my voice, just enough to say his name. It came out broken and hoarse, but it was enough. His tail thumped against the ground in quick, uneven beats, the sound steadying me more than anything else. Someone wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. Someone else talked about calling the police. I heard words like gang, thieves, money, rumors. They asked me questions I couldn't answer yet. How many men? what they wanted, why they chose me. I closed my eyes and let the voices blur together. The answers didn't matter as much as the simple fact that I was lying in the open air again, not sealed away, not forgotten. The tree behind me stood split open now, its secret exposed, its insides raw and visible to everyone. It looked smaller somehow, less powerful than it had when it held me. The police came later. They took notes, walked the yard, examined the tree with expressions that tried to stay professional but failed. One of them shook his head slowly, muttering that he'd never seen anything like it. They asked about money again. I told them the truth. There was no hidden fortune, no savings worth killing for, just a few dollars and a life that had already been worn thin by time. They nodded, wrote it down, and left with promises that sounded practiced and light. I knew better than to expect much. Men like the ones who did this didn't get caught easily. They faded back into whatever places they came from, leaving behind damage that didn't make headlines. In the weeks that followed, the tree was cut down completely. I couldn't bear to see it standing there anymore, hollow and silent, pretending nothing had happened. Watching it fall was harder than I expected. It had been part of my life for so long, a place of rest, of routine. Now it was just wood, piled and removed, leaving behind an empty patch of ground that felt wrong every time I looked at it. I stopped sitting in the backyard after that. I spent more time inside, closer to walls, closer to things I could touch. I healed slowly. My wrists carried scars where the rope had been. My shoulders ached for months. Sleep didn't come easily. Darkness felt different now, heavier, more crowded. Some nights I woke up gasping, convinced I could still smell damp wood and earth. Buddy never left my side during those nights. He slept pressed against me, one paw always touching my leg, as if afraid that if he let go, I might disappear again. People asked me what I learned from it, what lesson I took away. I never knew how to answer that properly. I didn't come back wiser or braver. I came back quieter, more careful. What I did learn, though, was simple enough to understand. Money had brought strangers into my yard, chasing something that wasn't real. It had almost buried me alive. Love, real, stubborn, wordless love, had torn me back out of the dark. They hid me inside a tree and walked away, thinking time would finish the job for them. But my dog didn't care about time. He only cared that I hadn't come home. If this story stayed with you, if it made you pause, even for a moment, leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Stories like this don't always make the news. They survive because people remember them. And if you believe loyalty like this still matters in a world chasing money, subscribe to this channel. More real stories are coming. Sometimes the only reason someone survives is because they weren't forgotten.